There is a particular kind of humiliation that arrives not with a shout, but with the sound of cardboard scraping against hardwood floors. I was standing at my kitchen window on a Tuesday morning in March, holding a cup of coffee that had gone cold without my noticing, when I heard it. That sound, the low, dragging scrape of boxes being moved from the hallway toward the front of the house. Then the metallic groan of the storm door. Then silence. Then the thud, the heavy, unmistakable thud of something being dropped onto the front porch. I set my mug down on the counter, slowly, the way you do when your body has already understood something your mind is still refusing to process. I walked to the front window. My son-in-law, Derek Whitfield, was standing in my front yard in his good sneakers, the ones he'd bought with the credit card that I had not yet asked him to stop using, holding a cardboard box that I recognized immediately. It was the one I kept on the top shelf of the guest room closet, the one with the flap that never quite closed right, the one that held my late husband Gerald's woodworking tools, his favorite chisel, the hand plane he'd spent 3 months restoring in our garage the year before he died, the small square level he'd used to build our first home's deck with his own 2 hands, back when we had nothing but time and each other, and the kind of optimism that only the very young and the very much in love can sustain. Derek set the box down on the porch steps. He didn't set it down carefully. He dropped it. So then he turned around and walked back inside. Past me. Without a word. I stood at the window. A minute later, another box. This one, the green one from under the bed. The one with my mother's china. The serving platter with the small blue forget-me-nots around the rim. The one she'd carried from her own mother's house, wrapped in a kitchen towel in 1967. That one he carried with one hand. He dropped it too. If this story is already finding its way under your skin, hit that like button and subscribe to Margaret Reed. And drop a comment telling me where in the world you're watching from. She always said the ones who stay quiet longest know the most. Let's see if that's true. I should tell you something about the morning before that one. And the year before that. Because none of this arrived without warning. Humiliation of this kind never does. It comes in slowly, the way water finds its way through a foundation. One hairline crack at a time, invisible until the morning you wake up and the floor is wet. My name is Margaret Elaine Calloway. I am 71 years old. I have silver hair that I stopped apologizing for sometime around my 65th birthday, and I have the kind of posture my mother drilled into me as a girl. The kind that says, I was here before you arrived, and I will remain after you leave. I live in a 4-bedroom craftsman house on Delwood Road in a mid-sized city in the American South. A house I have lived in for 34 years. A house that my husband Gerald and I bought together with the combined savings of 12 years of marriage and one very good year in commercial real estate. Gerald died 6 years ago. Pancreatic cancer. 14 weeks from diagnosis to the end. The speed of it still takes my breath away sometimes, on quiet mornings, when the house is too still and I pour 2 cups of coffee before I remember. My daughter Sandra was 38 when she married Derek Whitfield. I'll be honest with you, I tried to see him the way she saw him. Sandra had been through a difficult first marriage, a quiet, grinding kind of difficult that doesn't make for dramatic stories, but leaves its marks all the same. When she came home from her first date with Derek 3 years ago, her face had a brightness I hadn't seen in a long time. So I looked for his good qualities. I looked hard. Derek was 41, tall, with the easy confidence of a man who had been told he was charming so many times he had begun to believe it was a talent rather than a habit. He worked in residential real estate, selling it, not developing it, a distinction I understood better than most, and he had a way of entering a room that made him feel slightly larger than his actual dimensions. He laughed loudly. He had opinions about wine he couldn't quite pronounce, and opinions about business that he offered to anyone who didn't move away fast enough. He called me Margaret from the first day. Not Mrs. Calloway, not Mom, which I wouldn't have required, but which Sandra's first husband had offered naturally within 6 months. Margaret, like we were colleagues. Like I was a file he needed to keep organized. I noticed. I noted. I said nothing. They married 18 months after they met, in a garden ceremony that Sandra had planned beautifully, and Derek had contributed very little to accept an opinion on the band. They moved into the house on Delwood Road 3 months after the wedding. Temporarily, Sandra said, just until they sorted out the logistics of finding their own place. Derek's condo lease was ending. It made financial sense. Just for a few months. That was 14 months ago. In 14 months, Derek had reorganized my kitchen, streamlined it, he said, while I stood in the doorway watching him move my canisters to the upper shelf I can't reach without the step stool. Canceled the landscaping service I'd used for 11 years without asking me. Introduced his own streaming subscriptions to the television and referred to the channels I watched as background noise, and twice invited his father Raymond to stay for extended weekends without mentioning it to me in advance. Raymond Whitfield. I need to tell you about Raymond. Raymond was 68, recently retired from a career in pharmaceutical sales, and possessed of the particular certainty that attaches itself to men who have spent decades being the most important person in every room they chose to enter. He wore his graying hair combed with a precision that suggested he had spent a great deal of time in front of mirrors. He called his son the way a coach calls a player, with ownership implied. He called me Maggie the first time we met, a name no one has called me in my life, and when I gently said I go by Margaret, he laughed the kind of laugh that meant I hear you, and I'm going to do what I want anyway. He had a way of looking around my house that I recognized from 35 years of working alongside men in commercial real estate. It was the way you look at something you're planning to acquire, not admiring, appraising. I noticed that too. I noted it. I said nothing. The guest room, the room that had been Gerald's study, repurposed after he died, where I'd kept his bookshelves and the leather reading chair he'd had reupholstered twice because he loved the shape of it, had been slowly transformed over the 14 months since Sandra and Derek moved in. First, the books moved to the hallway shelves. Then the leather chair went to the garage temporarily to make room for a desk Derek occasionally used when he worked from home. Then a second monitor, then a printer, then Derek's framed real estate license, and a motivational poster I will not describe, except to say it featured a mountain and a sentiment that would have embarrassed a reasonable person. I let it happen the way you let small things happen when someone is your daughter's husband and your daughter is happy and you have learned, over 71 years, that not every battle is yours to fight. But Gerald's woodworking tools, my mother's china, those were a different kind of thing entirely. The morning Derek carried those boxes to the porch, I stood at the front window for a long moment. Then I walked to the front door and opened it. Derek was making a third trip. This one, a long plastic bin, the clear kind from the home organization store, that held Gerald's shop apron, his safety glasses, his old catalog from the woodworking supply company he'd ordered from every Christmas. Raymond was in the yard. I hadn't noticed him at first, because he'd been standing to the side, near the hydrangea bushes, with his hands in his jacket pockets. But when I stepped onto the porch, I saw him clearly. He was watching Derek come down the front path with the plastic bin, and he was nodding, slowly, approvingly. When Derek dropped the bin next to the boxes on the lawn because the porch wasn't enough, Raymond actually applauded. Not sarcastically, not quietly. He put his hands together 3, 4, 5 times in that brisk, satisfied way people clap at the end of a workman's job well done. "Sa, there you go," Raymond said. "Getting it done." Derek grinned. I stood on the porch in my robe and my house slippers, holding the doorframe, and I looked at my husband's things scattered on the frost-damp grass of the yard I had kept for 34 years. The chisel, the china, the apron that still had a smear of wood stain on the left pocket from the last project Gerald ever finished before he got too sick to stand at the workbench. Derek finally looked at me. "Morning, Margaret," he said. "We're clearing out the guest room, going to turn it into a proper home office. Should have done it months ago." He said it the way you tell someone the grocery store moved the cereal aisle. Informational, unapologetic, already done. Those are my husband's things, I said. My voice was very quiet. They were taking up space. You've got storage in the garage. The garage is. I stopped. I took one breath. Derek. Those are Gerald's tools, his tools, and that box has my mother's china in it. Derek's expression shifted for a moment, not toward apology, toward impatience. We can wrap the china better if you're worried about it. He glanced at his father. Raymond shrugged with his eyebrows, the universal gesture of I told you she'd make this difficult. I'd like you to bring them back inside, I said. We're in the middle of something, Margaret. I'd like you to bring them back inside. A long pause. Derek looked at Raymond. Raymond looked at his shoes. Some silent communication occurred between them. We'll deal with it later, Derek said. He turned and went back through the front door. Raymond followed him. The storm door banged shut. I stood on my porch for another moment, looking at Gerald's things on the grass. The morning was cold. The ground was still wet from rain 2 nights ago. The chisel had landed at an angle against the china box, and I could see the corner of the cardboard beginning to darken where it had settled in the damp. I went inside. I walked to the kitchen. I picked up my phone, and I called Howard Crane. Howard Crane had been my attorney for 22 years. He'd written Gerald's will, handled our real estate trusts, guided me through 3 property acquisitions, and one very complicated tax situation in 2018 that I will not bore you with, except to say it resolved in my favor, because Howard is very good at what he does. He was 64, a deliberate man who said very little and meant everything he said. The kind of attorney who made the other side of the table nervous simply by being present. He answered on the second ring. Margaret. His voice was the same it always was, calm, prepared, the voice of someone who had already considered several possible outcomes before the conversation began. Good morning, Howard. I need to talk to you. Sometime this week, if you can manage it. I can manage today. 2 o'clock? 2 o'clock. I didn't explain further. Howard didn't ask. In 22 years, I had not called him without a reason that merited his full attention, and he knew that. I set the phone down and stood in my kitchen for a moment, looking out the back window at the garden Gerald had put in the spring before his diagnosis. The roses were just beginning to show the first green hints of new growth along the canes. I'd pruned them in February, the way I did every year. I thought about Raymond's applause. I thought about Derek's grin. I thought about the way people reveal themselves completely when they believe the person they're dealing with has no power. I went upstairs, dressed carefully, came back down, went to the front yard, and brought my husband's things in from the cold myself. Each box, each bin. I carried them to my bedroom, and I stacked them against the wall where I could see them. Then I sat down at the small writing desk I keep by the window, and I did something I had been doing, in various forms, for the past 14 months. I opened my notebook. I wrote the date. I wrote what had happened. I wrote what had been said and by whom. I included Raymond's name, and the precise sequence of events, and the time. I have 31 pages of these notes. 31 pages going back 14 months, written in the small, precise handwriting of a woman who spent 30 years as the unacknowledged architect of a real estate portfolio that now encompasses 11 commercial properties, 4 residential investment properties, 2 limited liability partnerships, and 1 very well-structured family trust that bears my name and my name alone. No one in Derek Whitfield's orbit knew any of that. That was deliberate. Here is something I should tell you about Gerald and me, and about what we built together, because you cannot understand the yard scene. You cannot understand any of what comes next, without understanding what came before it. Gerald Calloway was a carpenter's son from a small town in North Carolina who came to the city at 22 with a second-hand truck and a work ethic that I have never, in 50 years of watching people work, seen matched. He started in construction, moved to residential contracting, and by our mid-30s had begun buying small commercial properties with whatever we could save after expenses. It was my idea the first time. I'd been doing the bookkeeping for our contracting company, and I had noticed something that Gerald, who was a builder and not a numbers man, had not: that the tenants in the strip of retail buildings down on Merchant Street were paying rent that covered the mortgage, and then some, and that the building itself was appreciating at a rate that made our savings account look embarrassing by comparison. "So, we should own one of those," I told him one night at the kitchen table. He looked at me. He trusted me with the numbers the way he trusted himself with a level, completely, without verification. "Which one?" he said. "We bought our first commercial property in 1991. By 2008, when the market crashed and took most of our competitors with it, we had positioned ourselves conservatively enough to survive it, and, quietly, to acquire 2 properties from sellers who needed to exit quickly." Gerald called that year the education that almost broke us. I called it the year we learned who we were under pressure. Sandra knew her father worked hard. She knew we were comfortable. But Sandra had grown up watching Gerald leave the house before dawn and return after dark, watching us save instead of spend, watching us drive the same cars longer than our neighbors did and take our vacations within driving distance because the money was working somewhere more useful than a resort pool. She understood that her parents were financially responsible. She did not understand the scope of what that responsibility had produced, because Gerald and I had made a decision early on, a decision that ran counter to everything I've observed about how wealthy families destroy themselves, not to advertise what we had. The house on Delwood Road was not the house of people with nothing, but it was also not the kind of house that announces its owner's real situation. We had bought it before the portfolio grew, and we had loved it too much to trade it for something that would have required us to become a different kind of people. When Gerald died, the portfolio came to me, all of it. Gerald's will was structured, with Howard's help, to pass everything to me in trust, with Sandra and her children, my grandchildren, as beneficiaries after me. But the management, the decisions, the structure, mine. Entirely mine. I continued to manage it exactly as we had always managed it, quietly, methodically. Every quarter, Howard and I and our financial manager sat down and reviewed the properties, the trusts, the investments. Every quarter, the numbers looked the way Gerald would have been proud of. Sandra knew her mother was comfortable. Sandra did not know her mother was the primary landlord of the building on West Commerce Street, where Derek Whitfield's real estate brokerage occupied the entire second floor. She did not know that I had received Derek's lease application when he signed as a tenant 3 years ago, before he ever asked Sandra on a first date, and that Howard had reviewed it, and I had approved it as a standard commercial tenancy, and that I had filed it the way I filed every tenancy, in a folder in my office without comment. She did not know that the lease renewal had come across my desk 8 months ago, and that I had signed it, again, in the ordinary course of business. She did not know that I received a monthly deposit from Derek Whitfield's business that covered the operating costs of that floor, and generated a modest return, deposited automatically into an account Sandra had no knowledge of, had never been shown, and had never thought to ask about. I knew. Howard knew. Gerald, from wherever he was, probably knew. And on the morning of March the 14th, after Derek dropped my husband's woodworking tools on the frost-wet lawn of a house he had no legal claim to, and after Raymond Whitfield stood in that same yard and applauded like a man watching his son score a goal, I sat at my writing desk, and I wrote it all down. And I thought, calmly and without drama, about a great number of things. I thought about the lease renewal on West Commerce Street, which had 3 months remaining on its current term. I thought about the house on Delwood Road, which was held in my name, not Sandra's, not Gerald's estate, mine. A fact documented in the deed filed with the county recorder's office, a public record that Derek Whitfield had apparently never thought to look up. I thought about Howard's voice on the phone, calm and prepared. And I thought about my granddaughter Lily, Sandra's daughter from her first marriage, who was 15 years old and had been in her bedroom on the second floor that morning with her door cracked open, and who had sent me a text at 9:47 a.m. that read, "Grandma, I heard all of that. I'm sorry, they were wrong." I had written back, "I know, sweetheart. Are you okay?" She'd sent a single word back, "Yes." And then, "Are you?" I had looked at that question for a long moment before I answered. "Yes," I wrote, "I will be." It would be easy to tell you that I was calm through all of this in the way that people mean when they say calm. Unaffected, unbothered, above it. That isn't true, and I won't pretend it is. There is nothing unbothering about watching your dead husband's tools dropped on wet grass by a man who called him Gerald without ever having known him, while that man's father stands by and applauds. There is nothing unbothering about being 71 years old in a house you have lived in for 34 years and feeling, for one cold moment, like a guest. What I mean when I say I was calm is something different. I mean that there is a kind of clarity that arrives, sometimes, when things become sufficiently bad. When the gap between what is being done to you and what the person doing it understands about your position reaches a certain width. It is not peace. It is more like the stillness before a decision. I have felt it before. I felt it in 2008, when the market turned and two of our tenants called the same week to say they couldn't make rent. Gerald had panicked briefly, the way builders panic. "What do we do, Margaret? What do we do?" And I had felt it then. That stillness. I had sat down at the kitchen table, and I had looked at the numbers, and I had said, "Here is what we're going to do," and I had done it. I felt it that morning in March, standing in my bedroom, stacking my husband's boxes against the wall, looking at the chisel that still had sawdust in the handle groove from the last time Gerald had used it. Here is what I am going to do, I thought. I went downstairs. I made a fresh pot of coffee. I sat at the kitchen table with my notebook, and I began to write a list, not of grievances, though I had plenty of those and they were documented, but of facts, structural facts, so legal facts, the kind that don't require emotion, only patience. Fact: the house on Delwood Road was in my name. Fact: Derek and Sandra were living in it as guests. Informal guests, no lease agreement, no formal arrangement of any kind. Fact: Derek's brokerage occupied office space on the second floor of my building at 1140 West Commerce Street. Fact: that lease had a renewal clause with a 60-day notice requirement. Fact: the lease renewal was due in 3 months. Fact: I had signed a 30-year life insurance policy in 2001 that Gerald and I had treated as an investment vehicle and which had matured in 2019 at a value that would have surprised several people. Fact: the family trust, structured with Howard's considerable expertise, was managed entirely at my discretion. Fact: I had not yet told Sandra what this morning had cost her husband. I wrote those facts. I underlined one of them. Then I picked up my phone and I called Lily. She answered immediately. She was probably sitting in her room, listening. She is 15 and she is perceptive in the way that children of difficult households learn to be, with an accuracy about adult behavior that they should not have needed to develop so young. I have loved her since before she could walk. She calls me Graham without the ma, which I believe is a distinction of affection. Graham! Her voice was careful, low, checking. "Are you free for lunch?" I said. "You and me, I'll pick you up." A pause. I could hear her exhale. Yeah, I am." "Good. I'll see you at noon." I hung up. I looked at my notebook. I looked at my list. Then I went to my bedroom closet. No took out the gray wool dress that Gerald had always said made me look like I meant business, put it on, added my pearl earrings, and drove to Howard Crane's office. Howard met me in the lobby himself, which he doesn't always do. He shook my hand the way he always does. Firm, brief, the handshake of a man who has been in rooms where things were decided and knows how those rooms feel. "Come in," he said. His office on the 4th floor of the Meridian building had a window that looked out over the city's older commercial district. I had sat in this office many times. I knew the view. I knew the arrangement of the furniture and the order in which Howard's files were stacked, and the particular quality of silence he created before he spoke about something important. He waited until I had settled in the chair across from his desk. Then he folded his hands and looked at me. "Tell me," he said. I told him. All of it. Not just the yard, everything. The 14 months. The kitchen reorganization, and the canceled landscaping service, and the streaming subscriptions, and Raymond's extended visits. The slow annexation of my house, piece by piece, by a man who had apparently concluded that a 71-year-old widow was a category of person from whom things could be taken without consequence. And I told him about the yard, Derek dropping the boxes, Raymond in the hydrangea bushes, the applause. Howard listened without interrupting. This is one of the things I have always respected about him. He listens as if the details matter, because in his experience, they always do. When I finished, he was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "Do you want to know your options, or do you already know what you want to do?" I looked at him. "I know what I want to do." He nodded. "Tell me." And I did. I will tell you that by the time I left Howard's office at 4:15 that afternoon, a number of things had been set in motion. Quietly, without announcement. The way Gerald and I had always moved when the situation was serious, not with noise, but with precision. I will tell you that I had lunch with Lily at a restaurant she'd always wanted to try downtown, and that we sat at a corner table and talked for 2 hours, and that at some point she reached across the table and put her hand over mine and said, "Graham, whatever you're planning, I trust you." And I had looked at my granddaughter, 15 years old, with her grandmother's eyes and her grandfather's chin and her own singular courage, and I had thought, she is the reason I am not doing this slowly. I will tell you that I drove home that evening to find Derek and Raymond watching a game in the living room, comfortable and loud, their shoes on the coffee table I had refinished by hand in 2003, and that I walked past them without a word, went upstairs, sat at my writing desk, and made 3 more notes in my notebook. And I will tell you that at 8:42 that night, my phone buzzed with a text from Sandra. She and Derek had a standing Wednesday dinner with friends. She was on her way home. "Mom, you okay?" "Derek said you seemed upset this morning." I looked at that text for a long moment. "I'm fine," I wrote back. "I'll see you tomorrow." I set the phone down. I looked at the boxes of Gerald's things stacked against my bedroom wall. His chisel, his level, his apron with the wood stain on the pocket. I thought about Raymond's applause. I thought about Derek's grin. I thought about Howard's voice saying, "I'll have the notices prepared by Thursday." And I thought, they applauded because they were certain of what I was. They were going to have a very educational month. The next morning was a Wednesday, and Wednesdays I have a standing appointment. Have had for 11 years, since the spring after Gerald died, when my doctor told me that grief was not a medical condition, but that walking was, and that I should walk every day whether I felt like it or not. I go at 7 a.m., before the neighborhood wakes up fully, along a route that takes me past the park on Clemson Avenue and back through the older residential streets, where the oak trees are large enough to form a canopy over the road. In November and December, the light comes through the bare branches in long, pale strips. In March, it is beginning to warm, and the dogwoods are starting, that hesitant early bloom that looks uncertain of its own arrival. I walked that Wednesday morning the same way I walk every Wednesday morning. Steadily, with good posture, and with my phone in my jacket pocket and my notebook in my other hand, because I have gotten into the habit of writing while I walk, not looking down at the page, but working things out in my head and stopping when I need to, standing at the corner of Clemson and Aldrich in the cold morning air, writing 2 or 3 lines before I continue. I wrote 3 things that morning. The first was a number. The second was a date. The third was a name I hadn't written in my notebook before, not because it was new to me, but because until that week I hadn't needed to include it. The name was Patricia Ellison. Patricia was my accountant, had been for 19 years, and she worked out of a small office on the 8th floor of the same building where Howard had his practice. Patricia was one of 3 people in this city who understood the full picture of what Gerald and I had built. Howard was another. The third was a man named Cal Ostrowski, who managed our properties on the ground level: lease negotiations, maintenance coordination, tenant relations, and who had worked with us since 2004 and was, in my experience, the most competent human being I had ever encountered in a professional context. I needed to talk to Patricia. I needed to talk to Cal. I had already talked to Howard. The piece I hadn't yet decided was Sandra. Sandra came home from her Wednesday dinner late and went straight upstairs. I heard her footsteps on the landing, heard her pause outside my bedroom door. A long pause. I was reading, or pretending to read, in the chair by the window. The door didn't open. After a moment, the footsteps continued down the hall. In the morning, I came downstairs to find her already in the kitchen, standing at the counter with both hands wrapped around her mug, looking out the back window at the garden. She was wearing the green cardigan she's had since graduate school, the one with the pocket that's coming loose at the seam, and she looked young in it, the way your children always look young when they are unguarded. "Morning," she said without turning around. "Morning." I went to the coffee maker. A silence. The ordinary kind. The kind that has always lived in our mornings. We are not a family that fills quiet with sound. But this one had a different texture. A held quality. "Mom," she said. Derek told me what happened yesterday." She turned then, holding her mug with both hands. "With the boxes." I poured my coffee. "Did he?" "He said you got upset." She said it carefully, the way you say a word you're not sure you've pronounced correctly. I turned around and looked at my daughter. She looked back at me with the particular expression she has had since she was about 9 years old. Oh, the one that means she is trying to read a situation and is not sure what she's finding. Sandra has always been perceptive, in the way that people who grew up in quiet houses develop a sensitivity to atmosphere. She knew something had shifted. She didn't know what. "Those were your father's tools," I said, "and my mother's china." Sandra winced. "I know. He should have asked you first. He knows that." "He didn't ask me." "I know." A pause. "I'm sorry, Mom." I looked at her for a moment. Then I said, "Are you happy here, Sandra?" The question surprised her. She blinked. "What?" "Here, in this house, with Derek." "Are you happy?" She set her mug down on the counter. Yes. I mean, it's been an adjustment, all living together." "That isn't what I asked." She looked at her hands. Then she looked at me. "I'm working on it," she said. Which is a kind of honesty I have always loved in her, even when it tells me things I don't want to hear. I nodded. I picked up my coffee. "Good," I said. "Keep working on it." I went to the back porch to drink my coffee in the garden. After a minute, I heard Sandra going upstairs. I heard her bedroom door close. I heard, faintly, the sound of voices. Sandra's and Derek's. The particular low register of a private conversation that carries through old walls without yielding its words. I sat in the garden, and I drank my coffee, and I thought about what Sandra had just told me. Not in the words she'd used, but in the ones she hadn't. Then I went inside, washed my mug, picked up my phone, and called Patricia Ellison. Patricia answered on the first ring. Well, she always answers on the first ring in the mornings, which I have always found reassuring. "I was wondering when you'd call," she said, which is her way of saying she'd heard something, or sensed something, in the way that very good accountants develop a sensitivity to the financial weather, the way sailors develop a sensitivity to actual weather. "How are you, Margaret?" "I'm well. I'd like to come in Thursday if you have time." "I have 11 and 2:30. 11, I said. "Good. Bring the trust documents if you have them on hand." "I'll bring the whole folder." "Even better." I hung up and stood in the kitchen for a moment. Derek had come downstairs while I was on the back porch. I could see his coffee mug in the sink, rinsed but not washed, a habit I had mentioned twice and abandoned mentioning. And I heard, from the direction of the guest room that was now apparently a proper home office, the sound of a call beginning. Derek's work voice was different from his regular voice, more deliberate, more assured, the voice of someone performing competence for an audience. I left the kitchen and went to my own office, the small room off the front hall that had been mine since we moved into this house, the one with the bookshelves and the good desk and the filing cabinet with the lock I had changed quietly in January, 2 weeks after I noticed the file drawer had been opened and not quite closed the way I'd left it. I sat down at my desk. I opened the bottom drawer, where I keep the working copies of all the essential documents, the trust structure, the property deeds, the LLC registrations, the insurance policies, the files on each of our 11 commercial properties. I pulled out the West Commerce folder. I found the lease for the second floor, Suite 201 through 205. Tenant, Whitfield Residential Group, LLC. Term, 36 months, renewable. Monthly rent, $4,800. Current renewal option, due date, June 1st. I looked at that date for a moment. Then, I looked at the 60-day notice requirement written in Section 7, Paragraph 3. 60 days from June 1st was April 1st. Today was March 15th. I had 17 days before the 60-day window opened. If I wanted Derek's lease to expire in June rather than renewing automatically, I needed to deliver a non-renewal notice no later than April 1st. 17 days. Which was, in the language of real estate and time and patience, a comfortable amount. No, I closed the folder. I returned it to the drawer. I locked it. Then I opened my notebook and made a note. 2 words, the date, and an arrow. I closed the notebook. I put it in my desk drawer, which also locks. Then I stood up, smoothed my dress, and went about my Wednesday. Here is what the next 2 weeks looked like from the outside. From the outside, nothing changed. I came downstairs each morning and made coffee. I ate breakfast at the kitchen table. I read the paper, an actual physical newspaper, which Derek had once described as kind of a grandmother thing to do in a tone that was meant to be affectionate and landed like something else entirely. I kept my appointments, walked my Wednesday morning route, had dinner at the table on the nights Sandra was home, yet maintained the quiet and ordinary rhythms of a 71-year-old woman living in her house with her daughter and her daughter's husband and her daughter's husband's father, who was present again for what had become a third extended visit in 14 months. From the outside, I was a woman who had gotten upset about some boxes and moved on, who had made a few phone calls and gone about her business, who sat in the living room after dinner and read while Derek and Raymond watched television at a volume that was too loud, and who occasionally accepted a glass of wine from Sandra and said thank you, and who went upstairs at 9:30 with the reliable predictability of someone who had no surprises left in her. From the outside, I was exactly what they believed me to be. From the inside, it was a different matter entirely. On Thursday the 16th, I met with Patricia for 2 hours. Patricia is 62, with reading glasses she wears on a chain and a legal pad she fills with small, precise numbers that she then translates into language I can act on. She is not a warm person in the social sense. She doesn't ask about your weekend or comment on your shoes. But she has a quality I value more than warmth, which is that she never tells me what I want to hear. She tells me what is true. We went through the trust structure, the property valuations, the income projections for the year. We talked about the LLC that held West Commerce and 3 of the other commercial properties. We talked about the residential investment properties and the insurance portfolio. We talked about a number of things I won't detail for you here. Not because they aren't relevant, but because some things belong to me and Patricia and the locked drawer in my office desk and nowhere else. At the end of our meeting, Patricia took off her reading glasses and let them rest on the chain and looked at me. "What are you planning to do?" she asked. "I'm going to make some adjustments," I said. She considered that. "How significant?" "Significant enough," I said. That I want the structure to be clean before anything becomes visible. She nodded slowly. I can have a revised summary for you by Friday. That would be excellent. She picked up her legal pad. Then she stopped. Margaret, one thing. Yes. Don't do anything until the structure is clean. I looked at her. I have no intention of doing anything until the structure is clean. She relaxed by approximately 2 millimeters, which for Patricia is a significant emotional display. Good, she said. I left her office and rode the elevator down to the lobby, where I stood for a moment looking out through the glass doors at the street. It was an ordinary Thursday afternoon. People walked past with coffee cups and briefcases. A delivery van was double-parked in front of the building across the street. The dogwoods on the median were a week away from full bloom. I thought about the structure. I thought about clean lines and clear documentation. I thought about how Gerald had always said that the most important decisions weren't the ones you made in the moment. They were the ones you made in the preparation, weeks earlier, when no one was watching. Then I walked out into the afternoon and went to meet Lily for a coffee. Well, because Lily had a free period at 3 and had texted me that morning, Graham, can we talk? Not urgent. Just, can we? We met at the small place on Archer Street that does the strong espresso Lily likes. She is 15 and already particular about her coffee, which I find both concerning and delightful. She was there before me, sitting in the corner, with her school bag under the table and her hands wrapped around a cup, watching the door. When she saw me come in, something in her shoulders loosened. I sat across from her. I ordered my coffee. I looked at my granddaughter. She has her grandfather's eyes, that particular shade of gray-brown that changes with the light, that looks almost amber in the afternoon sun coming through the window, and she has Sandra's mouth and the posture of someone who has learned to take up less space in rooms than she's entitled to, which is something I intend to spend the rest of my life correcting. You wanted to talk, I said. Yeah. She turned her cup in her hands. I wanted to tell you something, and I didn't want to tell you at the house because... She stopped. Because Derek and his father are there. Yeah. I waited. Graham, she said carefully. Derek and Raymond, they've been talking about the house. She looked up at me. I don't try to listen. The walls are just thin. I know the walls are thin, I said. I've lived there for 34 years. She almost smiled. Then she became serious again. They've been talking about renovations, like major ones. Derek told Raymond that once the house is updated, the value goes up enough to... I don't know exactly what he said. I couldn't hear all of it. But it was something about leveraging it. And Raymond said something about how the timing was good because of, he said, at her age. She said those last 3 words with a specific disgust, the kind that belongs to someone who is young enough that at her age still sounds like a concept applied to other people. Graham, they were talking about your house like it was already theirs, I said. She looked at me. Yes. I picked up my coffee cup. I drank. I set it down. Lily, can I ask you something? Yeah? Your mother, when you hear her and Derek talking, what does she sound like? Lily thought about that for a moment. Tired, she said finally. She sounds tired. Like she's trying to make something work that requires a lot of effort. I looked at the table. Then I looked at my granddaughter. You've been very attentive. You taught me to be attentive. She said it simply, without any particular pride in it, just as a fact. You always said, watch the pattern, not the moment. I had said that, probably 100 times, in the context of business, of property, of how to read a room. It had apparently translated. What are you going to do? She asked. I looked at her, 15 years old, with Gerald's eyes, watching me with the particular focus of someone who trusts the answer she's about to receive. I'm going to do what needs to be done, I said, and I need you to do one thing. What? Be normal. Come home after school, do your homework, eat dinner, say goodnight. Don't change anything. Don't watch Derek and Raymond any differently than you have been. Just be yourself. She looked at me for a long moment. And you'll tell me when it's done? I'll tell you when it's done. She nodded. She picked up her coffee. Then she put it down again and looked at me very directly. Graham, whatever it is you're going to do, are you okay? Is it going to be okay? For you, not for them. For you. I reached across the table and put my hand over hers, the way she had done for me at lunch the week before, and I said, Sweetheart, I'm going to be better than okay. She held my hand for a moment. Then she said, very quietly, Good. Because he dropped Grandpa's tools on the wet grass, and I've been furious about that for 8 days, and I needed someone to be doing something about it. I laughed. Genuinely. It surprised me a little, the laugh. It came from somewhere further down than where the notebook and the filing cabinet and the locked drawer lived, from the part of me that belongs to Lily and to Sandra and to Gerald and to the garden in the spring. He did, I said, and something is being done about it. Raymond extended his visit. I hadn't been informed of this. I became aware of it on Saturday morning when I came downstairs to find an overnight bag that I recognized as Raymond's, tan canvas, monogrammed, sitting at the foot of the stairs. I looked at it. I looked at Derek, who was in the kitchen making eggs. Raymond staying on? I said. Derek didn't look up from the eggs. Just another week or so. He's helping me think through some ideas for the office space upstairs. Is he? You don't mind, do you? He's no trouble. I looked at the back of Derek's head for a moment. I'll need you both to keep the volume down in the evenings, I said. I've been sleeping lightly. Sure. Already moving on. Already done with that sentence. I made my coffee and took it to my office and closed the door. Raymond was helping Derek think through ideas for the office space upstairs. The office space that was, until recently, Gerald's study in the house that belonged to me, where Raymond had no standing to help think through anything. I opened my notebook. I wrote the date, the time, what Derek had said, word for word. Then I wrote Raymond's name and circled it. Then I wrote a number and an arrow and a date, April 1st. 8 days away. If this story has found you, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss a new story from Margaret Reed. The best ones are still coming, and the people who watch to the end are exactly the ones who need to hear them. The days between that Saturday and April 1st were the longest kind of quiet, the kind that has a pressure to it, like the air before a storm that everyone else is too busy to notice. I went about my life. I walked on Wednesdays. I met Howard once more, briefly, to review the language of the notice document he had prepared, a formal non-renewal notice for the commercial lease at 1140 West Commerce Street, Suite 201 through 205, effective June 30th. Clean language. Correct language. The kind that carries no emotion and therefore cannot be argued with on emotional grounds. I met with Cal Ostrowski on a Tuesday over coffee, and we discussed the property calendar for the quarter, and I mentioned that Suite 201 through 205 would be coming back to market in July, and that I wanted to begin thinking about positioning. Cal, who has worked with me long enough to understand what questions not to ask in the moment, simply made a note and said he'd have a market analysis for me by the end of the month. I called Patricia and received the revised trust summary she had promised. I reviewed it carefully at my desk on a Thursday evening with a glass of red wine and the quiet satisfaction of finding everything exactly where it needed to be. I did not discuss any of this with Sandra. I was not ready to discuss it with Sandra, and this requires some explanation. Sandra is my daughter. I love her with the particular intensity that belongs to the only child of 2 people who wanted her very much and worked very hard to give her a good life. I was not angry with Sandra. I was not cold toward her. We had dinner together when she was home, and we talked about her work and her friends and, occasionally, her daughter. And I asked careful questions and listened carefully to the answers. I was watching my daughter, not with suspicion, but with the attention of a mother who understands that Sandra was in a position I recognized from the outside, and that she was going to need, soon, to make some decisions about it for herself. What I mean is this: I was not doing what I was doing instead of helping Sandra. I was doing it first, so that when Sandra needed something solid to stand on, it would already exist. Some things have to be built before they can be used. Gerald understood that better than anyone I ever knew. You do the preparation, he used to say. You do the preparation while nobody's watching, and then when the moment comes, you're ready and they're not. Derek and Raymond were, during this period, in excellent spirits. I observed this with the neutral attention of a naturalist watching a habitat. They were comfortable. They were expansive. Raymond had, by his second extended week, begun to treat the kitchen as a shared space in a way that was qualitatively different from how it had felt before. He opened cabinets without hesitation now, commented on the grocery situation, once rearranged the items on the pantry shelf in a way that made me stand in the doorway for a moment before I moved everything back. Derek had acquired a second standing lamp for the upstairs office. He'd brought it home one evening and carried it past me in the hallway without mentioning it, and I had watched him go and then noted it in my book. They had begun talking, between themselves, in a way they apparently believed was private, but which the old walls of the house on Delwood Road rendered somewhat less than that. Not arguments, plans. Easy, forward-looking plans of the kind that people make when they believe the ground they're standing on belongs to them. I heard the word equity once from Raymond, late on a Tuesday evening. I heard timeline on a Thursday. I heard once from Derek. A sentence that contained the phrase "by the time she needs real care" in a tone so matter-of-fact, so genuinely devoid of malice. Because the cruelest thing about this kind of dismissal is how comfortable it is, how normal it sounds when people say it. That I sat in my chair in my bedroom, above the living room, and felt a specific settling cold. Not grief, not anger. The other thing, the stillness, the clarity. I picked up my phone. I checked the date. March 28th, 4 days. I put the phone down. I looked at Gerald's boxes against the wall. I had left them there since March 14th, not out of sentiment, but because I wanted them visible. A reminder. Every morning when I got up, and every evening when I went to bed. "They think you are the maid," the boxes said. "They think you are the furniture. They think you are the woman who is going to need real care, who is temporary, who can be arranged." I had 31 pages of notes. I had a lease notice waiting in Howard's filing system. I had Patricia's clean trust structure, and Cal's calendar, and Howard's precise language, and Lily's gray-brown eyes watching me across a coffee shop table saying, "I trust you." I looked at the boxes. "Show them," they said, in Gerald's voice, in the voice of the man who built the deck with the small square level, and saved 3 months of overtime for a leather sofa, and taught me to look at numbers the way he looked at wood, to find the grain, to work with it, to understand what was really there before you started cutting. Show them what you built. On the morning of March 31st, I dressed carefully. Not the gray wool. That was for Howard's office. I wore the navy dress that Sandra gave me for my birthday 3 years ago, the one with the clean lines, and my good leather shoes, and the pearl earrings Gerald had given me on our 25th anniversary, the ones with the small gold clasp. I came downstairs. Derek and Raymond were both in the kitchen. Derek was eating cereal, scrolling his phone. Raymond was at the counter with the newspaper. My newspaper, his habit of reading it before me, having been established over the last week without discussion. They both looked up when I came in. Some small calculation occurred behind Derek's eyes when he registered how I was dressed. I saw it. I noted it. "Morning," I said. "Morning, Margaret." Derek, back to the phone. "Maggie." Raymond with that particular nod. I poured my coffee. I stood at the kitchen counter and drank half of it. Then I set the mug down, picked up my bag, and said, to no one in particular, "I'll be out most of the day. I have several appointments." "Okay," Derek said, not looking up. I walked to the front door. I opened it. Then I paused. I turned back. "Derek," I said. He looked up. How is the business? The brokerage? A slight confusion on his face at the question, at the specificity of it. Good, good, yeah. Spring market's picking up. Spring is always good in real estate, I said. I hope it stays that way for you. Then I walked out the front door and got in my car. I drove to Howard's office. I parked in the structure on 5th. I rode the elevator to the 4th floor. Howard was waiting in the lobby. Ready? He said. Yes, I said. We went into the conference room. Howard opened his file. He placed the document in front of me. One page, clean, precise, bearing the letterhead of my property management company, Callaway Properties, LLC, and the correct legal language, and the correct date, and the correct names. Tenant, Whitfield Residential Group, LLC. Property, 1140 West Commerce Street, Suite 201 to 205. Notice of non-renewal of commercial lease. Effective date of vacancy, June 30th. I read it. I read it again. I picked up Howard's pen. I signed it. Howard countersigned as witness. He notarized it. He placed it in an envelope. Then he looked at me. Cal is serving it today? Today, I said. Cal Ostrowski was at that moment, I knew, because we had timed it, on his way to 1140 West Commerce Street, Suite 201 through 205, with a copy of this document in a certified envelope, to be delivered to the suite's front desk by 10:30 a.m. And the other matter? Howard asked. Tomorrow, I said. I want him to have tonight first. Howard nodded slowly. He understood what I meant. I wanted Derek to receive the lease notice. I wanted him to go home tonight knowing something had changed, some ground had shifted, and not yet knowing how much or in how many directions. I wanted him to sleep in my house one more night in the particular discomfort of partial knowledge. And then, tomorrow, the rest of it. One other thing, I said. Howard looked at me. I need you to prepare a formal letter of residency status, I said, for the house on Delwood, clarifying that Sandra and Derek's occupancy is month to month, at my discretion, with standard 30-day notice terms. Howard wrote a note. Do you want it served simultaneously with the second matter? No, I said. I want to give that one to Sandra directly, in person, before anything else happens. He looked at me with the expression he has worn in difficult situations for 22 years. Not approval exactly, but something close to it. The expression of a man who understands that the way you deliver information matters as much as the information itself. That's the right call, he said. I stood up. I smoothed my dress. I picked up my bag. Thank you, Howard, I said. Margaret. He walked me to the door. How are you feeling about all of this? I stopped. I thought about Lily across the coffee table. I thought about Gerald's chisel on the wet grass. I thought about Raymond's applause and Derek's grin and 31 pages of notes and the navy dress Sandra gave me for my birthday. I feel, I said, the way I always feel when the preparation is finished and the work is ready to begin. Howard almost smiled. Good luck, he said. I don't need luck, I said. I need good documentation, and I have it. I walked out of his office. I rode the elevator down. I walked through the lobby and out into the bright beginning of April, the dogwoods now in their full, uncertain bloom, the morning open and ordinary around me, and full of what was coming. My phone buzzed. A text from Cal. Delivered. Signed for by the front desk. 10:28. I stood on the sidewalk for a moment, looking at that text. Then I typed back, Thank you, Cal. I put my phone in my bag. I walked to my car. Tonight, Derek Whitfield was going to receive a certified letter informing him that his brokerage's lease on the second floor of 1140 West Commerce Street would not be renewed in June. Tonight, he was going to look at the name on the landlord line. Tonight, he was going to learn something he should have looked up before he ever brought his father into my kitchen to help him plan my house's future. And tomorrow, I was going to talk to my daughter. I did not go home immediately after Howard's office. I drove instead to the garden center on Route 9, the one I've used for 30 years, where a man named Pete, who has been working there since before Sandra was born, helped me load 4 flats of annuals and 2 bags of soil amendment into the back of my car. We talked about the spring, whether the late cold snap had hurt the early plantings, whether the roses along the east-facing walls would be early or late this year. Pete asked after Sandra. I said she was well. He asked after my knee, which I had injured last year and which has been fine since November. I said it was fine. I drove home and parked in the driveway. Raymond's rental car was there. Derek's car was there. Sandra's car was not, which meant she was still at work. I sat in my car for a moment. I looked at the house. 34 years. The hydrangeas that Gerald had planted the first spring. The ones Raymond had been standing beside on the morning of March 14th. The porch where I had stood in my robe and my house slippers watching my husband's things dropped on the lawn. I got out of my car. I went to the back, opened the hatch, and began unloading the flats of annuals. Derek came to the front door when he heard me in the driveway. He looked at the flats. He looked at me. Some new quality in his expression. I watched for it and saw it. A kind of searching uncertainty, the look of a man who has just learned something and is trying to understand what else he might not know. Need help? He said. I'm fine, I said. Thank you. He stood in the doorway for a moment longer. Then he went inside. I carried the flats to the side yard. I went back for the soil. I put on the old canvas gloves I keep in the garage. I knelt in the garden that Gerald planted in the spring before his diagnosis, and I began to work. The ground was warm enough. The light was right. The dogwood Gerald had put in the far corner 15 years ago was in full bloom now. Those 4-petaled flowers, white and slightly pink at the edges, that only last 2 weeks and are so beautiful during those 2 weeks that you understand why people spend the rest of the year waiting for them. I planted for an hour. By the time Sandra's car turned into the driveway, I had finished the east bed and was halfway through the south one, and my knees ached in the good way that garden work always makes them ache, and the afternoon had that smell, turned soil and April air, and the faint sweetness of the dogwood that I have loved for 30 years. Sandra got out of her car. She stood for a moment watching me. Then she came across the lawn and crouched beside me. You're planting, she said. I am, I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then, begonias. And impatiens on the north side. They need the shade. She nodded. She looked at the garden. Then she said, Mom, Derek got something in the mail today. A certified letter from a property company. A pause. He seemed unsettled by it. I pressed a begonia into the soil, firmed the roots. Did he? Mom! Her voice had the particular quality of someone approaching something they don't fully understand. The company that sent it. It's called Callaway Properties. I moved to the next spot, pressed, firmed. Sandra, I said without looking up, can you come in tomorrow morning, just you and me, before Derek is up? A long pause. The garden held its breath. Okay, she said finally, very quietly. Good, I said. Now hand me that trowel. She handed me the trowel. We worked in the garden for another 20 minutes in the kind of silence that has lived between us for 40 years. The silence of a mother and daughter who have always known that the important conversations wait for the right moment and do not need to be rushed. Above us, through the kitchen window, I could see the shape of Derek moving. Back and forth. The particular rhythm of a man pacing. I patted the last begonia into place. I sat back on my heels. I looked at the garden. Gerald's dogwood was still in bloom. The late afternoon light was in it, turning the white flowers the color of cream. Not much longer now, I thought. Not much longer at all. Thursday morning arrived the way April mornings do in the South, with a softness that is almost an apology for winter. The light coming through the curtains, at an angle that makes the dust motes look like intention rather than neglect. the air carrying the particular warmth of a season that has finally decided to commit. I was up at 6. I dressed in the quiet of my bedroom, in my good slacks, and the cream-colored blouse Sandra had helped me pick out at Christmas. She had said it made me look like myself, which I took as the compliment she intended. I put on my pearl earrings. I went downstairs. I made the coffee the way I always make it. I set the kitchen table the way I always set it for two. The good mugs, the ones with the slightly thicker rim that Gerald always preferred, the ones I use when I want to feel the weight of something in my hands. I put out the cream and the sugar bowl and 2 spoons. I sat down and waited. Sandra came downstairs at 6:40. She was already dressed, which told me she had not slept much. She had the look of someone who had spent the night assembling questions she wasn't sure how to ask. She poured her coffee. She sat down across from me. We looked at each other. "Good morning," I said. "Morning." She wrapped both hands around her mug. She looked at the table, then at me. "How long have you been up?" "A while." She nodded slowly. Outside, a cardinal was doing something emphatic in the dogwood. The house was otherwise very still. Derek was still asleep, which was by design, because Derek had not gone to bed until well past midnight, a fact I knew because I had heard him on the phone in the upstairs office until 11:30, and then the particular creak of the third stair that tells me when someone is moving in the house. "Callaway Properties," Sandra said. "Yes, that's your company." "It's mine and your father's, structured now as mine alone since his death. Howard and Patricia helped me reorganize the documents in 2018. I picked up my coffee. The holding company owns 11 commercial properties and manages the leasing and tenant relations for all of them." Sandra's hands were very still on her mug. 11, she said. "As of last January. We acquired the Hendricks building on Archer Street in 2019, which brought it to 11. She looked at me. Not with anger. I want to be clear about that, because Sandra is not a woman who leads with anger. She leads with comprehension, with the careful assembly of facts. And what I saw on her face in that moment was the particular expression of someone rearranging a large and complex picture that has suddenly revealed itself to be organized entirely differently than they believed. "Dad never," she started. "Your father and I made a decision early on," I said, "not to talk about it outside the two of us and the people who needed to know professionally. It wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It was, we had seen what happened to families who made their money visible before they were ready, who let the fact of it change the way people related to them. We didn't want that." "You didn't want that for me?" I looked at her directly. "We didn't want that for you." She looked down at the table. A long moment. Outside, the cardinal had been joined by something else, a mourning dove probably, given the sound. "Derek's office," she said, "is in one of those 11 properties. Yes." She was quiet. "Since before you met him," I said, "he applied as a commercial tenant. I approved the lease, as I would approve any lease. I didn't know he was going to become relevant to my personal life." She looked up at that. Something flickered across her face. A complicated thing, too layered to name in a single word. "Howard sent a non-renewal notice yesterday," I said. "Derek received it yesterday afternoon. His lease on the second floor of West Commerce does not renew in June." Sandra put her mug down very carefully on the table. She placed both hands flat beside it. "Mom," she said. "Sandra. That's Derek's. That's where his business operates, his whole brokerage." "I know." "You're—" She stopped. She looked at her hands. She looked at me. "Well, why are you telling me this now? Why not—" She stopped again. "Why didn't I tell you sooner?" I said. "Yes." I set my mug down. I looked at my daughter, 41 years old, tired around the eyes, wearing the green cardigan with the loose pocket seam, sitting across from me at the kitchen table in the house she grew up in. I thought about what she had said in this same kitchen, a week and a half ago. "I'm working on it. Because I needed the structure to be clean before I told you anything," I said. "And because I needed to understand what I was dealing with before I asked you to understand it with me. What are you dealing with? I reached into the folder I had brought downstairs and placed on the corner of the table. I took out 3 documents. I set them in front of her, in order. See, the first was a summary Patricia had prepared. A single page, clean columns, the aggregate picture of the portfolio. Properties, values, income, structure. The second was the deed to the house on Delwood Road. My name. Only my name. The third was the letter Howard had drafted. The formal clarification of residency status, month-to-month occupancy, 30-day notice terms. Not served. Not yet. Sitting on the table between us like a door that hadn't been opened. Sandra looked at the 3 documents. She didn't pick them up right away. She looked at them the way you look at something you need a moment to approach. Then she picked up the summary. She read it. I watched her read it. I watched her eyes move down the page, and then back up, and then down again, slower. She set it down. She picked up the deed. She read it. She set it down. She looked at the letter, but didn't pick it up. He was talking about renovating the house, she said. Her voice had gone very quiet. Derek and his father, they've been talking about renovations, about leveraging the equity. I know, I said. She looked at me. How do you know? Lily told me. And I hear things in this house, Sandra. I've lived here for 34 years. I know exactly how sound moves through these walls. Sandra closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, they were wet at the corners, but she didn't let it go further than that. Sandra has always had this quality. She feels things deeply and holds them with a kind of dignity that I think she inherited from her father. He doesn't know, she said. Derek, he doesn't know any of this. He knows now that the lease is mine to give or not give, I said. He doesn't yet know the rest. She was quiet for a moment. Are you going to tell him? I looked at my daughter. I thought I'd let him work it out. It took Derek until 9:47 to work it out. I know the time precisely because I was in my office with the door closed, reviewing Cal's market analysis for West Commerce, when I heard him on the stairs. The particular rhythm of someone descending quickly, the third stair creaking, the slight hesitation at the bottom that told me he had stopped in the hallway. Then the sound of his footsteps going toward the kitchen. Then Sandra's voice, level and quiet. Too quiet for me to hear the words. Then Derek's voice, louder, not shouting, but the volume of a man whose system has received information it hasn't yet finished processing. I set down Cal's report. I sat very still, and I let the sounds of the house tell me what was happening. I heard Derek say, "What do you mean?" And I heard Sandra say something I couldn't catch, and I heard Derek say, "Since when?" in a tone that had moved from loud into something more careful, which told me Sandra had said something that required him to recalibrate. Then silence. A long one. Then footsteps and a knock at my office door. "Come in," I said. Derek opened the door. He was dressed, which surprised me mildly. I had expected he would still be in the clothes he'd slept in. He had the look of someone who had put on a presentable exterior over a situation that was not yet presentable. His jaw was tight. His eyes were doing that searching thing I had seen in the driveway yesterday afternoon, but more intensely now, with the particular focus of a man who is reviewing recent history from a new angle and not enjoying what he's finding. "Margaret," he said. "Good morning, Derek." He looked at the room, at my desk, at the filing cabinet, at the bookshelves with the property binders lined up in order by acquisition year, something he had apparently not registered before, or had registered and not understood the significance of. "The lease," he said. "Yes." "The building on West Commerce. That's your building." "It is." He was quiet for a moment. He put his hands in his pockets, then took them out. "For how long?" "Since 2006. Your father-in-law and I acquired it in the spring of that year. The interest rate environment was favorable, and the location had long-term potential. It's performed well." He looked at me. A long look. "So some assembly occurring behind it." "You approved my lease application." "I did. You were a qualified commercial tenant. Your financials were in order, and your business plan was sound. I had no reason not to. You didn't. He stopped. You didn't say anything. When Sandra and I started, it was a business matter, I said. Separate from the personal. Another silence. In it, I could hear Raymond somewhere upstairs, a drawer opening and closing, the particular creak of the guest room floor. There are other properties, Derek said. It wasn't a question. He had clearly seen enough of something, the binder spines perhaps, or something Sandra had said, to understand that West Commerce was not singular. There are, I said. How many? 11, currently. He looked at me. Something moved through his face that I watched without naming. He was a smart enough man, Derek, I want to be fair about that, to understand in this moment that he had spent 14 months behaving in a way that would require significant revision in light of this information. That the ground he had been standing on was not the ground he had believed it to be. That the woman he had arranged and reorganized and treated as furniture and stood beside when his father applauded dropping her husband's tools on frost-wet grass was not the category of person he had filed her under. People reveal themselves when they think they're dealing with someone powerless, and they reveal themselves again, differently but just as completely, when they discover they were wrong about the powerlessness. Derek Whitfield, in my office doorway, was having that second revelation. He was not a bad man in the simple sense. I want to say that too, because simple villains make for satisfying stories and unsatisfying understanding. He was a man who had looked at a 71-year-old widow in a house full of her late husband's things and had seen an opportunity rather than a person, and that is a failure of character that has a precise name and does not require malice to occur. It requires only comfort and a certain kind of willingness to look away from what you're actually doing. What happens now? He said. Not a challenge. Not quite a question. The voice of someone who has arrived at the edge of something and is looking down. That depends on several things, I said. He waited. It depends on you and Sandra, primarily, I said. That is a conversation between the two of you that I am not going to have for you. The lease. The lease is what it is, I said. You have until June 30th. That's 90 days, which is more than enough time to make arrangements. The market on that corridor is active. You should be able to find comparable space. He looked at me. He looked at the room again. He looked at the binders on the shelf, and I saw him count them, or try to. The house, he said. Also what it is, I said, as Sandra can explain. He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, very carefully, I didn't know. No, I said. You didn't. Something in the way I said it closed the conversation. Not harshly, simply as a fact, the way facts close things. He nodded once, a small nod. The nod of a man making an internal adjustment that was going to take a great deal longer than this morning. Then he stepped back from the doorway and walked down the hall. I heard him go upstairs. I sat at my desk for a moment. Then I opened my notebook and wrote the time and 3 words. He understood it. I closed the notebook. I went to find Sandra. She was in the garden, standing in the middle of it with her coffee cup in both hands, looking at the begonias I had planted yesterday afternoon, the ones along the east bed that were already looking more settled in their soil than they had yesterday, roots finding purchase the way roots do when you give them the right conditions. I stood beside her. We looked at the garden together. He's upset, she said. Yes. He went upstairs to call his father. I didn't say anything to that. She looked at the dogwood in the far corner. Gerald's dogwood, still in its 2-week bloom, cream and pink in the morning light. Graham planted that, she said. Not to me. To herself. Or to the garden. No, wait. Dad planted it. Your father planted it, I said. The spring you turned 26. You were living in Atlanta. You came home for your birthday, and he'd just put it in, and it was about 2 feet tall. She smiled, a small one. I remember. I said it would never make it because he'd put it too close to the fence. You were wrong about that, I said. I was wrong about that? She looked at it. I'm wrong about things sometimes. A moment passed between us. Not empty, full. The way moments are full when two people who know each other very well don't need to say the main thing directly. Mom, she said. How bad was it? The last 14 months, from where you were standing. I considered that. The real answer, not the comfortable one. It was a slow accumulation, I said. Each individual thing was manageable. The kitchen reorganization, the cable service, Raymond's visits without notice, Derek using this house as a planning venue for decisions about this house. None of those things alone would have, but together, over time, the pattern was clear. What was the pattern? That he had assessed the situation and concluded that there was nothing here that could push back. She was quiet. The boxes, I said. Your father's tools. That was the moment I knew it had gone as far as I was willing to let it go. Sandra looked at the fence line, then down at the begonias, then at her coffee cup. I knew it was wrong, she said. When it happened. I knew it before I came downstairs and saw your face. I could hear from upstairs what was happening, and I stayed upstairs. Yes, I said. I've been doing that, she said. Staying upstairs. Telling myself it was temporary, it would settle, Derek would figure out that things would find their level. She paused. I've been working on it. I know you have, I said. But I didn't. She stopped, started again. I let him treat this house like it was his. I let Raymond come and go like it was his. I told myself it was just an adjustment period. But it wasn't just that, was it? What do you think it was? I said. She looked at Gerald's dogwood for a long time. I think, she said slowly, I was so afraid of losing the marriage that I stopped paying attention to what I was losing instead. I let that sit. Some things need the air around them before you respond. You're 41 years old, I said finally. You have your father's sense and your grandmother's stubbornness and your own particular kind of courage that I have watched your entire life. You will figure this out. What if I already know what I need to figure out, and I'm just not ready to say it yet? I looked at my daughter. Then you'll say it when you're ready, I said, and I will still be here. She looked at me. Her eyes were wet again, and this time she let them stay that way. I love you, she said. I love you, I said. We stood in the garden in the April morning, beside the flowers I had planted, and the tree her father had planted, and the 34 years of this house that had held us all, and the day continued to open around us, indifferent and beautiful. Raymond came downstairs at 10:15. I was in the kitchen. I heard him on the stairs, heavier than Derek, a different rhythm, and then he appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was dressed. He had his canvas bag. He looked at me. I looked at him. Maggie, he said. Raymond, I said. And then, because I have earned in 71 years the right to say what I actually mean in my own kitchen, my name is Margaret. A pause. Something passed through his expression. Not quite embarrassment, not quite humility, but something in that neighborhood. The expression of a man who has just been given information that changes the terms of the conversation and who is deciding what to do with it. Margaret, he said. I nodded. He stood in the doorway for another moment. He looked at the kitchen, at the canisters back where I had returned them to after he moved them last week, at the newspaper folded on my side of the counter, at the table set for two with the good mugs already used and washed and put away. Derek told me about the building, Raymond said. I assumed he would. And the house. Also assumed. He was quiet. He put his hand on the doorframe. Then he said something I genuinely hadn't anticipated. My son behaved badly, he said, and I encouraged him. I thought... He stopped. Started again. I saw a situation, and I thought I understood it. I didn't understand it. I looked at him. Raymond Whitfield, 68 years old, his canvas bag over his shoulder, standing in my kitchen doorway, telling me he'd been wrong. He didn't say it the way people say it when they want credit for the admission. He said it the way people say things when they finally run out of other options. No, I said. You didn't. He nodded once. I'm going to head back to Raleigh, he said. Give you all some room. I think that's wise, I said. He stood there for one more moment. He looked at the kitchen again, at the photograph of Gerald and me on the wall by the door, the one from our 25th anniversary, the two of us on the porch of the rental house in Asheville, Gerald's arm around me, both of us squinting into the sun and laughing at something I can't remember anymore. Raymond looked at that photograph for a moment. Then he picked up his bag and walked out the front door, and I heard his rental car start, and I heard it back out of the driveway, and then the sound of it fading down Delwood Road until the cardinal in the dogwood was the loudest thing in the yard. I stood in my kitchen. I put the kettle on for a second cup of tea. The conversation between Derek and Sandra happened in their bedroom, behind a closed door, on the afternoon of that same Thursday. I was in my office, and I could hear, through the old walls, the general fact of the conversation, the murmur of two voices, Sandra's steady and Derek's, with a quality to it that changed registers several times over the course of 2 hours, without hearing the words themselves, which was how it should be. Some conversations belong entirely to the people having them. I worked at my desk. I reviewed Cal's market analysis. I answered 2 emails about an HVAC situation at the Hendricks building. I called Patricia to confirm one final adjustment to the trust documentation. I made notes in my notebook that were not about Derek or Raymond, but about an easement question on one of the residential investment properties that had been pending since February. At 4 o'clock, Sandra knocked on my office door. "Come in," I said. She came in. She sat in the chair across from my desk, the same chair Howard's clients sit in, the one with the leather seat that is slightly worn on the right armrest from 30 years of people sitting in it and thinking through important things. She looked at me. She looked steady, tired, but the tiredness of someone who has just done something difficult and knows it was right. "Derek is going to call his broker," she said, "about space on West Commerce. He's not going to wait until June. He wants to start looking now." "That's a sensible approach," I said. "He's also going to look for an apartment." She said it simply, held it simply. I looked at my daughter. "Are you all right?" "I will be," she said, which is an honest answer. Possibly the only honest answer available in certain moments. "Do you want to talk about it?" "Not yet." She looked at her hands. "I will, just not yet." "Okay," I said. She looked up. "Can I stay here, Lily and I, while we—" She stopped. "For a while." I looked at her, my daughter, 41 years old, in her green cardigan, asking me if she can stay in the house she grew up in. "Sandra," I said, "this is your home. It has always been your home. It will always be your home." She looked at me for a long moment. Then she stood up, walked around the desk, and hugged me from behind, her arms around my shoulders, her chin resting briefly on the top of my head. I put my hand over hers on my shoulder. We stayed like that for a moment, in my office, in the house on Delwood Road, in the afternoon of the first Thursday of April, with the dogwood outside and the calendar of properties on my desk, and Gerald's boxes finally unpacked and properly stored in the place I had chosen for them, which was the built-in shelving in the garage that Derek had never thought to look behind. Derek moved out on the following Saturday. He was efficient about it, which I respected. He didn't make a scene. He had rented a furnished apartment in a building on the other side of the city, something he had organized with impressive speed once the decision was made, and he moved his personal items and his office equipment in 3 trips with his own truck. Sandra helped him with the first 2 trips. They were not warm, but they were civil, and civility in those circumstances is its own achievement. On his 3rd and final trip, as he was carrying the last box to the truck, he stopped in the front hallway. I was at the top of the stairs. He looked up at me. "I didn't look into things I should have looked into," he said. "No," I said. "I made assumptions." You did? He looked at the box in his hands. I'm sorry about the tools, he said. Your husband's tools. That was. He stopped. That was wrong. I looked down at him from the top of the stairs, in the house I have lived in for 34 years, in my good slacks, and my cream blouse, and my pearl earrings. Yes, I said. It was. He nodded. He carried the box to the truck. He drove away. I stood at the top of the stairs for a moment. Then I went downstairs to the kitchen, and I put the kettle on, and I called Lily. She answered immediately. Graham. He's gone, I said. A pause. Then, are you okay? I'm very well, I said. Is Mom okay? She will be. She's coming back from helping him load the truck. She'll be home in an hour. Good. Another pause. Graham. Yes. Did you tell me it was done? I stood in my kitchen, in the house on Delwood Road, with the kettle heating and the dogwood in the yard, and the 31 pages of my notebook on the desk in my office, and Gerald's photograph on the wall by the door, and the whole particular weight of what had been moved, and what had been held, and what had turned out to be exactly as strong as I had known it was. It's done, I said. Lily made a sound that was not quite a laugh, and not quite a sigh, but was somewhere between the two, the sound of someone who has been waiting for something for a very long time, and has now received it. Good, she said. 3 weeks later, on a Saturday morning, I sat at the head of my kitchen table. This detail matters, the head of the table, because for 14 months I had been sitting where I always sat, in the chair with the view of the garden, which is not the head of the table, but the side of it, the position of a person who is a participant rather than a presiding presence. For 14 months, Derek had been sitting at the head of the table, not because anyone had assigned him to it, not because any conversation had occurred about it, but because he had arrived at the table early on, and sat there and continued to sit there, and I had let it happen the way I let many things happen during that period. I sat at the head of the table now, because it was my table, because it had always been my table, because Gerald had built the table in 1991 from a single piece of figured walnut he'd sourced from a mill in western North Carolina, and because the table was in my house, and the house was in my name. And I was 71 years old, and I had earned in full the particular right to sit wherever I chose in my own kitchen. Lily was across from me with a bowl of cereal, and her phone turned face down, because we have a no-phone rule at breakfast on Saturday mornings, hers and mine, a rule we established the previous summer and have maintained because it makes the mornings more like themselves. Sandra was at the stove. She had slept. I had watched the quality of her sleep improve over the 3 weeks since Derek left. Not linearly, nothing like that, but in the general direction of rest. She was not all right yet. She was in the middle of the complicated territory between the ending of one thing and the beginning of whatever comes after it, which is terrain that requires time and cannot be hurried, and is nobody's fault for taking the time it takes. She was working on it, in the true sense of that phrase, with a therapist she had started seeing the previous week, and with the particular courage of someone who has decided to see herself clearly. She was making eggs. Not scrambled. Her grandmother's recipe for baked eggs in tomato sauce, the dish her grandmother made every Saturday morning when Sandra was a child, and which Sandra had been making for Lily for years, and which fills the kitchen with a smell that belongs entirely to this house and this table and this particular family. Almost ready, Sandra said, without turning around. Take your time, I said. Lily was looking at the garden through the back window. The begonias were fully established now. The impatiens coming in on the north side, the whole east bed looking the way I had planned it. Gerald's dogwood had dropped its blooms 2 days ago. Those 2 weeks, as they always do, arrived and departed before you were fully ready for them, but the leaves were coming in full and green, and the tree was, as ever, very much alive. Graham, Lily said. Are you going to tell me someday what you actually did? All of it. The properties and the trust and everything. I looked at my granddaughter. Someday, I said, when you're ready to understand it. I might be ready now. You're 15. I've been paying attention. I know you have, I said. That's why someday I'm going to need you to pay even closer attention. Some of what I've built is going to need someone to manage it after me. Lily looked at me with those gray-brown eyes. Are you saying what I think you're saying? I'm saying, I said carefully, that your grandfather and I spent a great many years building something, and that the people who should benefit from it are the people sitting in this kitchen. Sandra turned from the stove. She had heard. She looked at me with an expression I won't try to describe, except to say it contained something she had been carrying since Thursday morning, 3 weeks ago, and was just now beginning to set down. Mom, she said. The eggs, I said, before they overcook. She turned back to the stove. Lily looked at me for another moment. Then she smiled. The particular smile she has, slightly lopsided. Full of something that isn't quite mischief and isn't quite wisdom, but is some compound of the two that belongs entirely to her. You knew the whole time, she said. Didn't you? From the beginning. Not from the beginning, I said. I know things in the order that they become knowable. What I knew from the beginning is that when people reveal who they are, you should believe them. And Derek revealed himself. He did. His father helped. She considered that. And you just waited. I watched, I said. I documented. I made sure the structure was clean. And then, when the moment was right, I moved. One phone call, Lily said. That's what you told me. You called Howard. One phone call, I said. And 31 pages of notes, and 19 years of Patricia's accounting, and 22 years of Howard's counsel, and 67 years of paying attention to how things actually work. She absorbed that. So it wasn't really one phone call, she said. It was never one phone call, I said. The call is just what people see. Everything before it is what makes it possible. She nodded slowly. The particular nod of someone filing something away to think about for a long time. Sandra brought the pan to the table. She served the eggs, baked in tomato sauce, with the good bread from the bakery on Archer Street, with the olive oil poured over the top the way her grandmother always poured it, in the thin, careful stream that means you know what you're doing. She sat down. At the side, across from Lily. Not at the head. She looked at me, sitting at the head of the table. You should always sit there, she said. I know, I said. I intend to. We ate. The morning came through the kitchen window in long, warm strips. Outside, the garden was entirely itself. The begonias and the impatiens and the roses along the east fence that would open fully in another few weeks, and the walnut tree Gerald planted in the corner the year we moved in, the one he said was optimistic, because walnut trees take 20 years to become truly themselves. He was right about that. The tree is now fully itself. There is a message in that, one I have thought about many times in the years since Gerald died. That the most important things take longer than you expect and require more patience than feels comfortable and arrive at exactly the right time. Which is to say, when you have finally stopped measuring how long it has been taking. The eggs were good. The bread was warm. Lily ate with both elbows on the table, which is a battle I have chosen not to fight on Saturday mornings. Sandra refilled my coffee without being asked. I want to tell you one more thing, because I promised myself I would say it plainly. Not everything that happened in those weeks was satisfaction. Some of it was the particular grief that belongs to watching your daughter's marriage end, even when you know the ending was necessary, and even when you believe she will be better for it on the other side of the worst of it. Some of it was the loneliness of being the person in the room who knows the most, which is a loneliness that doesn't have a name precisely, but that anyone who has carried real responsibility for a long time will recognize. Some of it was missing Gerald with a ferocity that surprised me, not because I had stopped missing him, but because moments of decision always bring him close, and close is not the same as present. I sat in my bedroom on the night Derek left, with the boxes gone from against the wall, because I had finally found the right place for Gerald's tools, and my mother's china, and I looked at the room that was mine and had always been mine, and I felt the weight of everything that had been moved and everything that remained. I thought about the morning in March when I had stood at the window watching the boxes dropped on the frost-wet grass, about the particular cold of that moment, the sound of Raymond's applause. I thought about Howard's pen in my hand and the document with the right language. I thought about Lily's hand over mine across the coffee shop table. And I thought about Gerald, who built the deck and the table and the walnut tree and the life, who looked at numbers through my eyes and saw things he wouldn't have seen alone, who said on the morning we closed on our first commercial property, standing in the parking lot of Howard's building in 1991, the deed in his hand, his eyes bright with something that was partly terror and partly the exact opposite of it. Margaret, we're going to be all right. Yes, I thought. We are. I turned off the light. I slept well. Thank you for staying all the way to the end. The people who finish the whole story are the ones who understand it and the ones who share it. If this one moved you, the next video on your screen is waiting to do the same. And if you haven't subscribed yet, come back. There's always another woman the world underestimated. And we tell those stories here.